Okay, welcome back. This is Unit 1, and Unit 1 has psychological approaches. The second part of it is research methods generally, and that's a pretty big topic, and that's really the meat and potatoes of what we have to look at here. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on research methods. Now the last part that we loop into Unit 1 is personality. And that sort of fits in more with maybe the first part that we looked at, which was the approaches of, or the evolution of psychology, the different areas of it. So in a way, we're going to spend some time on research methods and then go back and introduce personality, but we're really going back and reviewing some of those things from the very first part of this unit. So first of all, how do psychologists and scientists, in this case, the science of psychology, how do they ask and answer questions? How do they differentiate the different types of research with regard to purpose, strengths, and weaknesses? And why use each of the different kind of research methods we're going to look at? That's really the key here, is to understand the why and when you would use certain methods and when you wouldn't. You should be able to describe how research design drives the reasonable conclusions that can be drawn. So by designing a type of research or a type of experiment, is that going to get at the best answer? And how can each research method best drive conclusions based on their results? So that's basically what we're looking at here. Most of you are pretty familiar with the scientific method. Some of you may have no idea what you're doing, but if you don't, basically it works in 5 parts, but I've pulled this apart a little bit more. You're going to observe the universe. You're going to see something in your surroundings. You're going to formulate a question. You'll come up with and invent a theory, which is really a hypothesis, an early estimate or guess as to what you think is the reasoning or the consistency with what you have observed. You're going to use a theory to make predictions then. So you go into all of this with a prediction. You think X is going to happen if A and B are combined. So you test those predictions by experiments or with further observations, and you modify them in the light of your results. So this is the part where I think some students get a little bit confused. They think that modifying them in the light of the results is, okay, you didn't reach your theory or your hypothesis didn't come true. So, well, what I need to do now is redesign this so that it does come into fruition, and I say, oh, okay, I was right. Really, to me, I think it means if you modify things, did you have all of your variables and operational definitions, were they working correctly? Because sometimes there might be a confounding variable or something that enters into play which can make your findings seem correct at first glance, but there might be a deeper reason why they're not. So that modification is more along the lines of adjusting the experiment to get a more correct result. So don't be thinking that I need to just keep adjusting my experiment until I get the results to match my hypothesis, because even though that happens in everyday life and in the world, especially when your research is being funded and people want the results to come out a certain way, really in the real world of what science should be, or in the practical world, it wouldn't be like that. So you would repeat step 3 through step 6 if necessary to get that all worked out. Then you're going to draw conclusions and report your results, and that's really an important part of this, because other people would have to be able to repeat your process and get the same results for it to hold up. So anybody can say, hey, the earth is flat, and run through a bunch of tests to show that it's true. But if there are thousands of other researchers who determine that that's incorrect based on things like science and math, then you'll be wrong. So a tentative theory that's not yet been tested is your hypothesis. Operational definitions are basically the way in which you'll measure that hypothesis. And it can vary among participants, or it can be different operational variables and definitions. The theory must be, as I mentioned in the last slide, replicable, which means that someone else can do this again, and you could do it again if need be. You could set your experiment up and run through it, and it would show the same results. The theory is aiming to explain a phenomenon, but not prove the phenomenon to be true. So your hypothesis can never really be proven true. It only can be supported or disproved. And I know that seems strange. You think, well, I want to know the truth. Let's get to the truth. But a guess is a guess, and you're getting close to understanding the truth. But it's very hard to prove a hypothesis exactly correct, and proving it is impossible. So you really are working to support it as much as possible, or to show that it is incorrect and is disproved. So I'm not going to show this video here, which is Psychology 101, Psychology is a Science. But I just want to show this for a reason, and it's a good spot if you're watching this and you go into just the slides and the notes. You can click on it and go through it and hear it. It's about 6 minutes long. There are a bunch of these video clips, and they're really good. Some of them are great, some of them are okay, but it's a way that this educational portal company has, and they place them all on YouTube for free, so really good resource for you to use to review some of this. Types of research, there's 3 types. There are descriptive, correlational, and experimental, and we'll look at all of these and even some additional things that can go into it. So most of us understand what research is, and we think we have a pretty good idea of what maybe descriptive research is. Correlational and experimental are a little bit more advanced. So let's look at them a little bit in a little bit clearer way here. Descriptive is going to observe and record behavior. We'll use case studies, surveys, and naturalistic observation. You do not manipulate anything. Correlational, you also do not manipulate anything. You're trying to detect occurring relationships. You assess how well one variable predicts another. If sale of eggs go up, and at the same time as sale of eggs go up, orange juice sales also go up, you can show that they're correlational. And in the same sense, if sales of eggs go down, sales of orange juice should also go down. So it's computing statistical association. Sometimes these are among survey results. Now, that doesn't mean that egg and orange sales are causing each other to go up and down, but there might be other variables involved. So experimental is the third way, and it means to explore cause and effect. So now you have an independent variable that is manipulated, and you're manipulating one or more factors using random assignment to eliminate pre-existing differences among subjects. We'll see all of this. First, let's focus on descriptive research. You've got the case study, the survey says, and naturalistic observation. Top 8 answers on the board. Things less painful than an 8-minute survey. I don't know what answer number 1 is, but I can come up with a few things that are pretty painful because to me an 8-minute survey is pretty awful. The picture at the bottom there on the left and right shows you examples of what a one-way mirror would look like. The 2 ladies on the bottom right side who are taking some notes and watching the meeting that is occurring in the room, they are going to be doing some naturalistic observation. The people inside the room in the meeting, they can't see them, and they don't even know that they're there. I guess that they know they could be there, which might change some things, as we'll see. But that's naturalistic observation. Let's go through these and just see. First, descriptive research. What is going on in this picture? Descriptive research works like this sometimes. What do you think you're seeing? Just kind of pause the video for a second. Look at this image and maybe write down in your notes, what do you think is happening here? Let's pause it for a minute and then come right back. Okay, we cannot say exactly what is happening, but we can describe what we see. There are a number of people. Most of the people's attention is focused on what? The person in the center. Okay, what's the person in the center doing Well, he is grasping a child. Could be a boy, could be a girl. It looks like he's almost picking them up or putting them down. Hard to tell. Is he playing with them? Is he taking them? What is he doing? He's got some muscles, though. In fact, I think his muscles have muscles. So, what's going on in the picture? This is a picture of Usain Bolt hanging out with kids in the Czech Republic. So, if you said that this is a picture of American kids, well, it's not American at all. These aren't Americans in any way, and Usain Bolt isn't American either. Some persons might come into this picture with some preconceived notions, and they may see someone's skin color or skin tone and associate, of course, African American males with some sort of violence. I'm just reading into this as to what someone might think. And I think that we have to be really careful of some of these preconceived notions that may be because of the preponderance of evidence on television. If you're a watcher of television news, if you are especially fearful of crime, and you know from watching the news that most crime occurs with African American males, these are the kind of things that just get you into trouble when you're doing research, because with descriptive research, you're going to describe exactly what you see, not what you're feeling or thinking. So you want to detach yourself from the situation. You're going to be looking for pieces of evidence, and maybe computational in that, like how many times is someone interacting with him or interacting with whatever situation that you're trying to research. So who's this Usain Bolt? He's the guy in the green there who's going to pull away from the rest. He's arguably the most talented and gifted athlete in the world, and definitely the fastest man in the world. And in the 2012 Summer Olympic Games in London, he won the gold medal in the 100 meters. He holds the world record in the 100 meters. He's pretty wild. And I think he is from, is it Jamaica? I think it's Jamaica. But pretty amazingly fast dude. So descriptive research works in all kinds of ways. You're going to observe and record. But it does not talk about relationships, it just describes. So it's not going to be correlational in any way. This is called statistical research. So let's look at this one here. There's two sides of the screen here at the bottom. You've got three boys with popcorn watching what looks like television. At the bottom, you've got a picture of a parent with a pointing finger, and that's a parent discipline style. Top right is aggressive play between three boys. Could be these three boys. Bottom right is a parent's discipline style where they're not pointing, but they're counting. Different look on the child's face. In the bottom right, they're looking directly at the parent. So if you were trying to do some kind of research that dealt with violent viewing of television resulting in aggressive play, and you also wanted to take into account parental discipline style, whether it's authoritative with the finger wagging and pointing, or maybe on the bottom right hand side of the screen, it's a parent who is giving a child choices. You didn't do your chores, so here's the way this is going to work. You can double your chores. You can have a choice to do that to make up for it, or you're going to get half of your allowance. These kinds of things that, that's a different parental style. So you would try to do some kind of an experiment or a descriptive research study to figure this out. One method is called the case study. So it's a person or a situation or a small group where you're going to observe it in depth. Case study is intensive. It's an analysis and research of an individual unit, like I said, a person, group, or event, and it's stressing developmental factors in relation to the context. So nearly every aspect of the subject's life and history is going to be looked into and evaluated. This can sometimes be cases and cases of files to deal with a case study, but you want to learn from this one group or one silo or one event, and you want to try to maybe generalize this to others and other events. But unfortunately, case studies tend to be really subjective and difficult to extrapolate out to the rest of the population, because you have to keep into consideration that it is what it is. It's not your population that you're looking at is small. So, for example, like clinical psychologists often use case study for a particular disorder, and they may study a single person or small group of people who are afflicted in a certain way. And while case studies allow researchers to get to the richest possible picture of what they are studying because they're only looking at a smaller view at that, there are limitations. You can contain evidence that a certain researcher thought to be important and maybe another researcher wouldn't. You could overinflate the importance of this one study when looking at other situations because it's such a small sample, and it's very unlikely it's going to be representative of the population in general because it's only a small person. But you could get in depth and really learn about one person in particular or one little small situation. Here's the second method. It's called the survey method. Almost every one of us has taken a survey. Heck, I've asked you to do a survey for my class at the beginning of this year. So why do you do this? You give a survey to see how people feel, or maybe to gather information. So as a technique for ascertaining the self-reporting attitudes, opinions, or behaviors of people, usually through questionnaire. And you're going to question a representative or random sample of people. You could use this in descriptional and correlational research, use interview, mail, phone, internet. I used Google Docs the same way. It's usually pretty cheap. It's diverse population. You could usually get to more people. And it's easy to get a random sampling. And this is where we can talk about random sampling. A sampling that represents your population you want to study. And we'll talk about some of this in class. But surveying is one way. This is one way that you can get some validity of your data. But it really depends on a lot of things. How are your questions worded? Who was surveyed? I mean, who chose the persons who would be surveyed? Or were they chosen in a definite random way? So there are limitations. How many of you have clicked on a survey you've seen on the internet and taken it? Most of us probably click no on that. So, and who usually does a survey? Maybe people who are highly upset about something, they want their opinion known, or maybe someone who is feeling like such a really happy person about the situation that they've dealt with that they want to tell the world what a great situation. So people may say what they think they want others to say is really a problem as well, because you're filling out the survey and you know someone else is going to read it. Are you really going to say what the truth is? Still a pretty good way to gather information and look at raw data. Here's the perfect example. How accurate would a survey be about asking someone about the frequency of their diarrhea? I mean, if you're asking the general public, how many times do you have diarrhea? People aren't really going to want to tell you about that nasty business. So you could get a very low response rate on this one, and people could lie and say, not me, I never have any problems down there, or misinterpret themselves completely. And wording can affect this in a big way. So survey method students often confuse the use of surveys to measure the dependent variable in an experiment with a survey method. And that's not the same thing. Surveys can be used as a part of an experimental method. The survey method, as described, is a kind of correlational research in which the researcher does not manipulate the independent variable. So when we get to independent-dependent variable, you'll probably see this, understand it better. Maybe if you come back through here and look at this again and review it before the test, maybe that'll click and ring a bit of a bell for you, because I know we haven't covered that just yet. So why do we sample? One reason is the false consensus effect, and that's the tendency to overestimate the extent to which others share your beliefs. This is exactly right on the money around presidential election time. In 2012, the last presidential election, if you're on Facebook and you look at your Facebook feed and you say to yourself, well, hey, you know what? Or any presidential election, or maybe even something that you believe is great, or a candidate that you believe is great for president or mayor or whatever. So you get on Facebook and you type in there about how much you think this person's going to be great for the country. And you get all these friends who agree with you. And you think, wow, everyone in the world must agree with me and I can't imagine anyone not liking this candidate. Well, the situation is that these people who are on Facebook and are reading your are your friends, and so they may very well share the same opinion you do, but they may not be representative of the whole sample. Plus, you have to be careful with this false consensus thing where your perception, doesn't become your reality, because it's probably not the real world situation. You got to think through it a little bit more. This is a Hawthorne video, and for AP this is real important, and it could help the academic psychology class understand it some more. Random sampling versus random assignment, and this can be tricky and confusing in some cases, and we'll cover this some more as we go. But this is a good spot here. I won't place this video in the video notes, but there will be a link to it on the website and in the actual slides of the notes. So let's look at descriptive research, the naturalistic observation. So basically, how does this work? You're observing and recording behavior in a natural environment. No control or interaction, just observation. So what are the benefits, do you think, of watching, say in this case, it's a train station, and you're going to observe behavior. Maybe it's a Monday morning at 10 o'clock, and you're going to see what impact, and you can tell this is sort of outdoors, what impact the weather on a Monday is for people. Maybe you're looking at what clothing they wear or whatever. So you could sit there with a clipboard and just basically scan and be able to check everyone who walks by or whatever. You're not interacting, you're not calling down and asking people what they're wearing. You're not stopping them as they walk up and picking certain people to ask. You're looking and observing and marking down on your paper exactly what you see. So naturalistic observation does not impact the behavior of participants. Students sometimes confuse this with field experiments, and that's not exactly the same thing. Both involve doing research out into the real world and out into a different, non-lab situation, but it definitely is not a field experiment when you're doing naturalistic observation. So a really classic example of the goals of naturalistic observation is Jane Goodall's work with chimpanzees, and you see her at the Houston Zoo on the right side there, but really younger picture of her at the bottom, and she worked for over 40 years observing chimpanzee behavior, and she came to understand some insights that scientists had never seen before and understood before about chimpanzees. Why? Because she used these techniques of naturalistic observation in a way that was intense and over a long period of time, and her observations were more complete than what had been done in the past. So she saw things like understanding that they do have personalities, that chimpanzees can use tools in a small way. She would notice that they would take leaves, stems of leaves, and stick those into ant hills and pull that out, and then eat the leaf, which would give them the nutrition of the ant hills. Well, people were like, they don't eat ants, they're vegetarians. Chimpanzees don't eat ants. But she noticed that they did. So it's a more realistic and rich picture of the participants' behavior, but control is sacrificed for certain. Now, in her case, she was an observer for a long time, but then she became someone who started to interact with them at a later point in time. So obviously, she wasn't a natural scientist either, and a well-trained scientist. She went about things a little bit differently, but if you know more about her, she's a really interesting person. Let's look more at naturalistic observation. There are definitely some drawbacks. The first is it's valuable where other methods are likely to be disruptive or misleading. If you go into a workplace and say, okay, we're going to do an experiment here to see how well you can improve your improve your productivity. People are going to know about that, and it might be strange, but there are other ways you could say you can come in and kind of try to control that. You control it so much you don't even know what the natural working conditions were like. So But here's the big thing. This is the Hawthorne Effect. If people know they're being observed, they tend to act differently than they normally would. And these observations can be distorted if observers expect to see certain types of behavior. So it can be distorted on both ends, by the person being observed and by the observer themselves. The next slide here is another example of good video to watch if you're still needing some information about research methods. This is the Understanding Psychology video with Phillips and Bardo on research methods. Really a good one. It's kind of a classic. It's an older video, but it does a good job. Let's look at experimental research. This explores cause and effect relationships, and like other sciences, experimentation is really the backbone of psychology and psychological research. So we've got three main ones that I show pictures of on the right side. The Pavlov's salivating dogs, that we'll talk about some in class with Psych Trek for sure. Milgram's obedience study, which we've already mentioned when we looked at ethics. And Arsh's conformity experiment, which I'm going to take a minute here to talk about. The participants at the bottom there, all of them, there's 6 of them, 6 men, and they're all sitting there, and they would look at line length. There's line A, B, C, and they were asked to look at a card, which would be the one on the left there at the bottom, and say, okay, which line length matches the line on that card? Is it A, B, or C? And people on that team were already told, hey, listen, you are going to say C, that it matches C, even though you know it doesn't. And there's one person in that group who doesn't know about this, and we're going to see if they change their answer. And the first time through, the person would typically stand up for himself and not say that answer and say, hey, I think it's B. Second time through, they're really wavering. Third or fourth time through the line situation, they have now switched to what everybody else is saying, because they conform to the social standard. These are experiments that can isolate cause and effect, and really that's the only research method that we have that can do that. Now, cause and effect relationships. Eating too many bananas causes constipation. Can you say that for certain? Well, you could do some research on it, and they've found that that actually happens, and they looked at the science behind why, the potassium in there, other things. So for him, that doesn't look like a good situation, but for some people maybe it would be if you were needing to be constipated, I guess. The next few slides here are experimental terminology, lots of definitions, and so I'm not going to run through every one of these. Instead, I'm going to have them up here. I'm going to look at a couple of the other factors around there, but I would really know these definitions pretty well, and we're going to use them in an experiment in just a minute. But at the bottom is an experimental group. So you've got the experimental group on the left, the control group on the right, and in the middle it's asking what's being compared, what's different. So let's look at the experimental group. First group measures dependent variable sick sailors. Okay. The middle part of that, administer experimental stimulus, which is fruit. The bottom portion, remeasure the dependent variable, healthy sailor. So no longer red-faced. The control group is the same situation. You're measuring the dependent variable, the sick sailors. But what are you not doing? You're not administering the stimulus fruit. And so that's what's missing here down in the middle is fruit. And what do you have at the end? You've remeasured the dependent variable, which is here, and remeasuring it, you still get sick sailors. So that's a quick idea of the experimental group. I really like the two on the side here. The independent variable influences change in the dependent variable. And the really nice graphic at the bottom, she is the independent variable, he is the dependent variable, she is leaving, and says to him, nothing you do affects me, I'm independent. And the dependent variable looks up at her and says, some things you do affect me. So what affects or influences change? The independent variable. So we'll be looking at that in a couple different experiments. And here it is again, kind of pulled out. But looking instead here at experimental group and control group. So who's the experimental group? They are exposed to an independent variable. They receive special treatment, and the control group does not. The experimental group is exposed to it. The control group is not. It's controlled. So you know it shouldn't have the effect if the hypothesis is correct. Much more definitions here for you, and the reason I put them in here and in the notes is I just want to make sure that you're clued in on this, and knowing these definitions is a really important part of the test. Research measures what the researcher set out to measure. It's accurate, that means valid. Reliable, that means you are being consistent. Then we've got the sample, which is a group of participants. Population, anyone or anything that could be sampled. The random sample is every member of the population is given an equal chance of being selected. Random assignment is once they are selected, then randomly putting them into the different groups after random selection, then you get random assignment. A stratified sampling is similar to the random sampling, except you're going to pull out for race, gender, maybe hair color, or whatever group you think that you should be thinking of. There's also participant relevant confounding variables and situation relevant confounding variables, and mostly what you need to understand is a confounding variable is one that may have gotten in the way of it being a valid or reliable experiment. So participant relevant, you're going to use random assignment that would limit the effect. Participants would not be able to choose their group. So participant relevant confounding variable. Situation relevant confounding variable, situations in which the different groups are put must be equivalent except for differences produced by the independent variable. If there are differences for other reasons, that's a confounding variable. So last spot here for experimental method, only experiments can identify cause and effect. Again, that's pretty important. And experimenter bias can sometimes come into play. This is a special kind of situation relevant confounding variable where the experiment bias is the unconscious tendency for a researcher to treat the members in a special way. So if you're asking somebody a survey question and you're inflecting with your tone of your voice, or trying to say it in a way, you may not even be aware you're doing that. Maybe it's body posture, maybe it's hand motions, or the way your facial expression looks at them. It could potentially change their answer of the survey, and you can get a different result. This can be eliminated using the double-blind procedure. Neither the participant nor the researcher are able to affect the outcome because they don't know which group that the people are in. Single blind is just that the participants don't know which group they've been assigned. And another run through here of this, you get your experimental group and your control group, like we've mentioned before. There's Hawthorne Effect, which merely selecting individuals to participate can impact their behavior alone. The placebo is an inert but otherwise identical substance, so it's not going to make any impact on someone. It's like a placebo is like a sugar pill. If you're looking at the psychological effects of a certain drug and you give someone a drug that looks exactly like the others but there's nothing to it, it's just a sugar pill, they take it and then they feel these behavioral changes, it's probably a psychological change and not a medical change. So the phenomenon where a subject behavior changes by the mere fact they're being observed, this is the Hawthorne Effect, and it came into play in that Western Electric Company from the earlier slide you saw. But otherwise, the Hawthorne Effect is also known as reactivity. So let's look at an experiment here real quickly. The hypothesis for our experiment is that caffeine helps keep high school teachers alert and happy. So could we test this on our population of AHS teachers? We certainly could. Let's look for a representative sample. You'd want male, you'd want female, you'd want multiple subject areas that they taught. You want to pull from different areas of the building or different houses that we have. You could do a random sample, which would be put all the teachers' names into a hat and pull out, say, 60 of them. And it's totally random. You shuffle them up. Someone blindly pulls them out. You do a stratified sample to make sure that you're dividing the group, the population, into groups of male and female and pulling an equal number maybe, or a representative number. New teachers and veteran teachers, and making sure you get people from English, science, social studies, math, and all the different electives and things. You could stratify it to be sure that they're equal to the population, and that's basically what we're looking at here. Let's look at the two different, and really in this case, like 3 groups. So group A might be participants drink 2 cups of regular caffeinated coffee every morning for a month. So you're going to administer the coffee to them when they come to school. Ask them not to drink any coffee before they come to school. Of course, you can't totally control that, but so they come into school, and you have, and as they're coming in the door, you have a cup of coffee ready for them in a regular cup that no one would be able to identify as being in any certain group. Your experimental group gets caffeine. Your control group is going to get, and there's 2, group B, participants would drink 2 cups of decaf coffee every morning for a month. You get your 2 cups of regular coffee in group A, 2 cups of decaf in group B. Group C, they're going to get a hot drink of brown coffee flavored water. It's not caffeine, it's not decaf. It may taste like coffee, but it's not. So, random sample. Remember we talked about this earlier. Once a sample is obtained, the researcher randomly assigns participants to control group and experimental group. So how do you assign to the group? You could do numbers. Every participant picks up a number randomly, and then 1 through 10 is going to be group A, 11 through 20 is group B, and so forth. You'll separate them by number into control and experimental groups. The next part of the experiment here, if you're looking for the independent variable, that's the cause. The dependent variable will be the effect. So with the cause, you're looking at the factor manipulated by the experimenter whose effect is being studied. It's not caffeine, but it's the type of drink. So it's either decaffeinated, caffeinated, or water, the brown water. What's the dependent variable? Well, that's the effect. So you're looking at the factor that may change in response to the independent variable. So in this case, it's maybe behavior or mental processes. How can you measure that? Alertness, crankiness, mood, that sort of thing. And how could you measure it in our case, in our situation? I'm sure you could do observational data, but to make it easier, we could do a questionnaire at the beginning to establish a baseline, and then a questionnaire at the end of each day for a month. So at the end of each day for a month, you fill out this quick form, give them the feedback, and see if there are changes in your mental process or mood or behavior, your alertness or your crankiness. So in our experiment group, Group C is getting the placebo. They think it's coffee or caffeine, but it's not. This is to check the true effect of the independent variable. Placebos, if they make you feel better, it is a psychological thing. So if someone's in Group C and they're saying, boy, I'm so much more alert since I started this study, and I really think this coffee is great, this is really helping me, they're falling prey to the placebo effect. And it is a pretty big and prevalent effect, so you want to measure it. And I wouldn't be surprised if a number of teachers had a bit of a placebo effect, especially from Group C, which is a group that would have that. So what are some other aspects of our experiment here? You've got the single blind. That means that teachers don't know what group they're in. They're the participants. They don't know what group they're in. The double blind would be the teachers, the participants, nor the persons gathering the data, the experimenters, know which group is the control or experimental group. And maybe it's all done through a computerized system and a number-based system that most of the people who are in the experiment, who are dealing with the participants, would not know the answer to. Obviously, you might have an overall researcher who would know that answer and who would be running the experiment, but the people who are fulfilling the roles of gathering the data and administering it would not know. That'd be double blind. So which is better? Double blind would be great. But it's not always necessary, but it does help to balance out some bias, because you want to be careful about confounding variables. They are not good, and they can render your results meaningless, unreliable, or invalid. So how could it be in our case a confounding variable? Is there still some caffeine in decaf coffee? There is some, so that could be impactful. The experience with the coffee that someone has had prior to the experiment. For example, for me, I have had a lot of experience with coffee. I don't really start the day without it usually. And maybe I've built up a tolerance to it, or perhaps if I'm in group C, I'm really going to feel an effect if I don't have any coffee. The amount of sleep that someone gets, and maybe that is dependent upon stress at the workplace. If you do this experiment at our school at the very beginning of the year, I think you're going to see that teachers are a lot more stressed out. It's just the nature of coming back to school. So maybe they're not sleeping as well for whatever reasons. So you can see how experiments can sometimes be littered with confounding variables, and determining what those are is going to make your experiment much more valid. So remember, hey, rewind and rewatch and take notes while you're looking at these things. And don't get frustrated. Bring your questions to class. The videos are out there to help you. You also have your textbook. There's PSYCH-Trek. There are lots of ways. You just look through the notes without me talking. And you can pull all this up on your cell phones and your computers at home, or in the library, down in the library. But don't get frustrated. Bring these questions to class. I think we're just scratching the surface on research methods. Statistics and correlational research is coming next. And some students get kind of like bummed out by this. Don't get down. This is some of the nitty-gritty and like fundamental and foundational stuff that we need to do to talk about experiments. But some of the really fun stuff is coming. We'll be looking at personality. That'll liven things up a little bit. And some of the experiments around that, I think knowing this and understanding this will help you to learn it in a deeper and better way. And repetition's at the root of learning. If you've got to watch this a second time, do it. Hang in there. Maybe get some caffeine. So there's one other thing I wanted to show you here. That's quasi experiments. So these are studies that have the same control as experiments, yet do not include random assignment of participants. So let's show you an example. Researchers want to test hypothesis that a pregnant woman's use of drugs will cause abnormalities in her developing baby. Can you see any issues with this? I can see a bunch. Number one, you're going to set up an experiment that administers drugs to pregnant women? Really? That's probably not ethically sound, as we showed you in the last video and notes when we talked about ethics. But a quasi experiment might work, where you could randomly assign women who have already decided to use drugs while they're pregnant. And I don't know, maybe this is like cigarette smoking. Maybe there's a segment of people who still do this, but you shouldn't. So maybe you're going to smoke cigarettes while you're pregnant, and they would be able to look at the effects on the baby. I mean, if you were going to take this initially to somebody, no IRB, no independent review board would allow this. However, women who are doing drugs or smoking or whatever the case may be and are pregnant, that's still happening, I'm sure, in the population. If you were able to get those people to join your experiment, you could test the results on them and see what the impact was on the fetus or the developing baby. This one kind of bums me out. Don't do this. So there's a couple other things to look at here. And one of the reasons we do experiments is to learn more, but you have to be careful about some of the things that may jump up to bite you, like hindsight bias. That's a tendency to believe that after learning the outcome, oh, we knew that all along. This is common sense. But that's not the case. I mean, you've got to be careful if you're doing science and looking through these variables and doing it correctly. Hindsight bias may seem like common sense, like, oh yeah, I knew that, but did you really understand that? Overconfidence is a big part of this. Now, we tend to think we know more than we do, and everybody's like this. So some of the statistics are interesting. 82% of U.S. drivers consider themselves to be in the top 30% of their group in terms of safety. Those numbers don't match because that's not possible, but people still all think they're excellent drivers. 81% of new business owners felt that they had an excellent chance of surviving their business, succeeding, and thriving. But when asked about the success of their peers, other people in the industry, their answer was, I think about 39% would. That's overconfidence. In fact, it's probably closer to 39% because it is really tough to get a new restaurant or new business working. Anyway, Hawthorne again does a really great job with experimental design here. We're going to look at some of this in class to help you understand it better. But the experimental groups, control groups, independent variable, dependent variables, they can be confusing. I know this can be confusing, so hang in there if that's the case for you and you're like, oh man, I can't understand this. Or work on it some in class and bring any questions you have to class, and that'll help out. So take it easy. We'll see you this week, and don't forget to be awesome.